All right, so church history, a survey. We're going to talk about all sorts of things today, but the key verse when you're addressing church history or whatever you're reading when it comes to cults, heretics, heretical ideas from a pulpit or more, got to remember what Jesus said in Matthew 16:18. He said, the gates of hell will never prevail against my church.
Amen.
Ever. We had the early heretics in the first century, the Gnostics. We'll get into some of those specific doctrines throughout this course, and you have to remember that the early fathers were the early church apologists that combated a lot of the early heretics. And there's a saying within the world of historical theology, thank God for the heretics, because they forced us to the drawing board to really refine what do we mean by triunity, what do we mean by hypostasis, diophysis, and all these things, and Trinitarianism and so forth. And of course we have, I'm just going to make it easy, think of orthodoxy, think of Roman Catholicism, and think of Protestantism. All right? Which one do you think is the oldest? Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy was mainly after Jews and Christians were kicked out of Jerusalem, which we'll talk about in a while today. They went to Antioch. And Antioch, in Antioch of Syria, is where they were first called Christians, followers of Christ. Prior to that move, they were just known as followers of the way, because Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. So then we have, of course, cults, right? You have to remember the early heretics, issues that has gone on throughout the church, Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Protestantism. Third category would be cults. Nothing's changed. You know, when Mormons say, listen, I was praying, and I was asking the Father, which church should I join? You know, he was told divinely, Joseph Smith, good old Joe in New York City, out there digging for treasure. Asked the Lord, which church should I join? And the Lord told him, join none. They're all corrupt. Same message you get from Muhammad. I think the same demon was behind Islam and Mormonism. Identical. As far as, don't trust anything, I'm going to give you alone the truth, as opposed to the scriptures. You know, the Bible is 66 books, written by 40 authors, right? Covering how many years? Some 1,800, right? On 3 continents in 3 different languages. And they agree on the tough issues such as origin, meaning, morality, destiny, prophecy, eschatology, you name it. Take 2 theologians in a room. They can't even agree on how to spell Jesus. It's going to be Yeshua, you know, Josephat, or whatever. That's just an inside joke, but you get what I'm saying. So, false teachers and preachers, you'll hear of them, because heretics are not going away. So, when Jehovah's Witness, you know, remember how they were founded. There's another call, I'm just going to hit those 2 a little bit. Is you got Charles Taze Russell, you know, he's in his 20s. He's a youth pastor. He knows enough to be dangerous. Has a home Bible study, which is often how a lot of Protestant churches are founded, without there being a bishop in charge. It's sort of like, hey, Stan, let's have a Bible study at your house. And Steve shows up once a week, and then we have 15 people, and then we meet at a school, and now we have our own church. Sort of like independent Protestant little units, right? It wasn't like that at the beginning, you know. When Paul wrote Corinth, there was an established church, you know what I mean? And Peter, James, and John, they're kicking it in Jerusalem. You have the church council in the book of Acts, the Jerusalem council. They call Paul to the forefront. Go, what are you talking about? You have to compare his revelations. Because after Paul got saved, he went into the Arabian desert for 3 years. He had to rethink everything he'd been taught. And he was taught under whom? Gamaliel, the heavyweight in Jerusalem. So, interesting stuff there. The future of the church, I'm not going to get into that because we don't have time. That's more centered on eschatology. But let me tell you this. Evangelicalism today is changing so fast. People ask me, what are you? I just say I'm a Christian. I'm a broad Christian. That's how the critics label me. Nick's a broad Christian. Because I cut too many people slack, except for heretics and cults. I don't. But in any event, you will see unpopularly, you want to look at the second slide. Second slide unpopularly on the first PowerPoint upload. There I have a chart that I created, and it says Orthodoxy, it says Roman Catholic, it says Protestant, all right? Now, when I say Roman Catholic, that's different from Catholic. In the creeds, going back into the first centuries of our faith, it was the Universal Catholic Church. That included what does universal mean? It's the same as Catholicity. The word Catholicity means within Christendom that salvation is universally available to all. Just bow the knee. You haven't heard of the Lord? Respond to general revelation, and special revelation will be granted. No preacher goes. God can drop a Bible from an airplane. He can send an angel. He can send a theophany. He can give them visions and dreams, like you see in some of these Muslim nations now. If you're a missionary, you go in, well, you're going to get hacked, worse than what ISIS is doing, in Iraq. But part of this little chart here is very basic. It shows orthodoxy, straight, continuous, right? And then you have in 1054 AD what's called the Great Schism. Because remember, now Rome has been going hard since the 3rd century. You know what I mean? Some early stuff in about 180 AD that Catholic apologists will defend. The papacy began at 180. Well, even if you grant them that, we had the Jerusalem church, we had the church in Antioch, and we had Corinthians and Ephesus and all those. What about the 7 churches of Revelation? If you go with a late date on the book of Revelation, which I do, I go 96 AD, who was he writing to or about? There were churches before the one true church in Rome. Now, I've studied in Rome. I like hanging around with these priests. I love their religious fervor. I don't debate them too much, except for, demonology and these things, because that's what I was there for. But, you know what? It's one of those things. Listen, Christianity is broad, all right? But the Great Schism that occurred in 1054 AD, that's just some 1,100 years after Christianity came onto the scene of world history. The Pope sends a cardinal from Rome straight into the Middle East, all right? And you have the head of the Orthodox Church, which is very broad. You have the Russian Orthodox Church, and so forth. The Eastern Orthodox Church. And remember this, too, that Christianity is not a Western faith. You guys, we're all westernized. We read the scriptures through American lenses. Really do. We look at prophecy through American eyes. And that sometimes is not very healthy. It's not very healthy. People have been talking about the second coming, since right after the ascension, for crying out loud. 2,000 years. And every single generation thought that was it. You have big-time pastors and even, evangelicals, teachers out there saying, maybe this is it right now. What, because of ISIS? And because Russia's flying a few planes around, throwing their weight around? Well, maybe. Maybe not. I don't like the current president, but I don't think he's the Antichrist. The Antichrist is supposed to be handsome, smart. He's neither. He's a buffoon. But, so in 1054, Rome sends a cardinal straight in to the Orthodox bishop who's doing a Bible study. Walks in and slaps a letter and says, you have been excommunicated. And they're going, excommunicated from what? We were here first. We've been doing this since day one. You guys are over there clowning around in Rome. Do what you will. You've copied, the Roman Empire. It's sort of like, Obama, if he was a pope, and you got Congress, you got the House of Representatives, bishops and cardinals all lined up. They copied the Roman Empire of doing secular politics, for crying out loud. That whole structure is not New Testament, And then, of course, so 500 years later, in 1517, you have the Reformation. Martin Luther did not want to start a new movement. Protestant Reformation, Stan. He did not want to break away from the Roman Catholic Church. He wanted to reform it. He's saying there's some stuff going on in here. Yeah, the gates of hell will never prevail against the church. That doesn't mean, listen, we're in a church right now. We're not perfect. Are you perfect? When you find a perfect church, don't join it because you're going to ruin it, right? We're still sinners saved by grace. And sometimes we push the envelope a little too much when we shouldn't. So the point that I'm trying to make here, though, is at the get-go, that verse where he says the gates of hell will never prevail against the church, you got to remember now, 1517, what does Protestant mean? It means we're protesting. Against what? Are we protesting against the church that the gates of hell will never prevail against? That's an interesting question, isn't it? The Roman Catholics, well, I call them protesters too because they protested against Eastern Orthodoxy. Middle Eastern Orthodoxy. You know? And that's an interesting spin. So you have here Orthodoxy, right? Continuously, oh, you got a huge line, right? 2,000 years. And then here, in 1054, Rome, the Great Schism that has never been repaired between the East and the West. 1054, Roman Catholicism goes this way. And then in 1517, we break away from Roman Catholicism. Now we have the Protestant movement. Because the Catholic Church put a price on Martin Luther's head. And he meant well, but he wanted to reform what was there. You know, it was just too much. Christianity on steroids, you know? But then you look at the Eastern Orthodox, you know, you got smoke, bells, whistles, and all that stuff, something that we don't have. But then you look at some of the Protestant churches, you know, really when you think about it, when you go to church, it's sort of like you're dating the Creator. You're going to have a very special meeting. So sometimes, you know, when I was younger, yeah, I go in with surfer shorts and flip-flops. I didn't care. But I didn't say you have to be like the Baptist with a tie, you know what I mean, and a 1940s suit, and everybody just looks boring. But it was Wayne House that pointed this out to me. He says, you know, and I just wish we would dress for the occasion. And he's got a point, you know. Some of our churches look like Christian country clubs. You know what I mean? What's up, bro? All the high fives, sitting there kicking back. People are, you know, on Facebook. Well, yeah, the whole thing. So, the older, now, if you gave it 1,000 years of the Lord should tarry, okay, the Protestant movement will probably have a few smoke balls too, you know, and bells and whistles. Maybe an icon here or there. Maybe it'll be Billy Graham, Chuck Smith, Greg Laurie, one of those guys. I don't know. But the older a movement gets, the more tradition you'll have. Similar to this, when you first became a Christian and people ask you, so what denomination are you? You can barely spell the word. Right? So you say, well, you know what, we're non-denomination. I mean, we don't answer to anybody, just the Lord. We're just out here in the left field doing our own thing. Do you hear how funny that sounds? But here's the pride. We're non-denomination. All right? And then you got 5,000 churches that are also now non-denomination. And so now non-denominationalism becomes the denomination. You know.
The thing about that, and the example I'll give you is Calvary Chapel. If you go to Calvary Chapel here, or if you go to one in Utah, or wherever, there's no real appreciable difference. I don't know why it's non-denominational. I mean,
sure.
The announcements are at the same time, the worship's at the same time,
sure.
the service is the same.
Yeah.
It's the same type of sermon.
Yeah. It is.
Structure of it is very...
But the bottom line, the gates of hell will never prevail against the church. We all have our issues. And moving on. So that'll be uploaded as well. Remember, I'm going to go fast now. The cross inscription read, Jesus Nazarenus Rex of Judaeum, right? Which is Judah in Latin, meaning Jesus of Nazareth is King of the Jews. That was the inscription that you saw at the top. Cicero, a Roman statesman. Here's what he said about Christians in the early part of the church, very early. Let the very name of the cross be far, not only from the body of a Roman citizen, but even from his thoughts, his eyes, and his ears, unquote. This was not a popular faith. Put that into perspective. Where in the world did Christianity come from? It was not a Jewish idea of a messianic rising Messiah from the dead. They had an idea of a general resurrection at the end of times, where Gentile and Jew will all be raised. That's why when you're at the Kidron Valley, right, I keep telling you this, you got the eastern wall here. They call it Ezekiel's Gate, and nobody really knows where that gate is. If it's that gate, it's probably 400 feet below. So when they go, that's Ezekiel's Gate, chances are it's not. All right, depends who your guide is. But you got the Kidron Valley here, and over here you got Hades, or hell. That's where they burnt trash during the Second Temple era. And that's, of course, hardcore Muslim right now. It's kind of funny, you go on a map, here there's Hades, and you see, Muslim minarets sticking up through the sky, and it's all foggy. It kind of looks, little chilly, I got lost down there one time, first time in Jerusalem. I'm like, let's just drive down to Hades, and it was roadkill in the streets, people looking at us like, what are you doing? And I'm sitting with the cameraman, because we were doing documentaries, and he looks out the window, he's doing the peace sign. I'm like, put your finger down, that might mean something else. Who knows? It's like doing this in Italy, But interesting stuff. Bottom line is, again, Christianity is a Middle Eastern religion. It's not Western. We cannot Westernize it. Jesus was a Jew. He came from a Jewish family, studied Jewish law, and observed the Jewish religion. Who he corrected were man's traditions, the Pharisaic way of thinking. And the rabbis, they wouldn't hold back. I mean, if they could figure a way around the Torah, which means law, Torah, or instructions in Hebrew, if they could, on Sunday, say, for example, you can't leave your house. You have to stay within your white picket fence in Tel Aviv or Jaffa, right? And let's say you want to leave your house. Well, just tie a rope around your belt, a 500-foot rope, and walk down to 7-Eleven. You know what the rabbis would say? I'm extending my property as I'm walking. That's the kind of stuff you're dealing with, Or if your wife overcooks your eggs in the morning, you can divorce her. That was man's Jewish law. Really, 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 really off-the-wall stuff. But the bottom line is that's what Jesus was correcting. They're standing there. Remember, he says, standing with a glass of wine, and there's a gnat in it. Remember, it's got to be kosher wine, so you can't have a fly landing in your wine. You've got to strain that gnat and drain it. Oof, this is disgusting. This is unclean. And then they're standing there lusting after all the women walking up and down the streets, right? Or fasting, walking around like this. Oh my goodness, I'm hurting. What's wrong with you, Stan? Oh, I've been fasting for 3 days. My goodness, you're holy. I know. He's like, listen, do this on your own. Don't be a spectacle. That's what he was correcting. That stuff was not in the Tanakh. Tanakh means Old Testament. Torah means law, 5 books of Moses. You won't find that in the Old Testament. Why do I say Tanakh? Because for the Jew, there is no New Testament. What do you mean Old and New? There's only one Testament for the Jew. So if you go, the Old Testament says, going to go, oh, what? So we call it Tanakh. In any event, when we're getting into martyrs, the disciples and martyrdom all the way up, in Rome, under Nero, Domitian, and all these crazy emperors that threw Christians into the Colosseum, to essentially be eaten, by ravished animals. It would be like Anaheim Stadium. People sitting there with their beer and their popcorn, and the Christians tossed in. They would take, cut the meat out of an animal and dress you in fur and throw you in there. Here comes a bear. And as they rip you in pieces, people would applaud. Sort of like UFC, but Roman style. Crazy. But where did Christianity come from? This is the most important thing you have to remember, because this is what launched the church. Christ died. He rose from the dead, right? He spent 40 days with his disciples, including some pagans, in 1 Corinthians 15. And then he ascended on the Mount of Olives. Right after that, who was the first martyr? Stephen was stoned to death, right? And when you look, all the disciples died the life of a martyr except for John. They say he died of natural causes in Ephesus. And many people believe he was actually taking care of Mother Mary in Ephesus. Because when Jesus says, hey, take care of my mother, right, from the cross, well, that's where we end up. But I don't know how he teamed up with her, because he was sent to Patmos first. Right? The Alcatraz of the Middle East. We wrote the book of Revelation.
So as John said, it's the one that Jesus loved, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, many say so. Many say so. All right. So, what led to their death is, right out of the gate, they were preaching Christ crucified and the resurrection. Are you Megan?
No.
What's your name? Oh, okay. I got an email from you? Or was that somebody else? Okay, because there's online students also, so I'm just trying to recognize who's who. All right, no worries. In any event, in the book of Acts, you'll notice that every single sermon talks about the resurrection of Jesus. Now, I'm going to ask you right now, I don't care what church you go to, how many resurrection sermons do you hear a year? One. It's Happy Easter. Whenever they delivered a sermon in the book of Acts, which is early church history, right? Luke wrote Acts. It's a sequel to the Gospel according to Luke. And you start with Pentecost. 5,000 people were added to the church. They were not speaking in tongues. They were speaking different languages because people from all over the world came for the festivals into Jerusalem. And, you know, if there was a Swede, they were going for Gud, så mycket. Wow, he speaks my language. He's a Jew. Mexicans roll in there, ¿por qué de tal manera? And it's like, whoa, look at this guy. Of course you're going to bow, right? So, resurrection preaching, getting killed for that belief, where did it come from? You can't just dream it up if it's not a Jewish idea. I'm getting somewhere here. Because, again, the Old Testament rabbinical way of thinking, including all the people at the synagogues worldwide, following now Gamaliel, Paul, and the rest of them, right? Including Mishnah, right? You end up with the Mishnah in time, and all these other Jewish commentaries. But the point is, what launched the new faith, the way? What launched it? It was a resurrection belief. If no one rose from the dead, okay, why preach it? Worse yet, let's say no one rose from the dead. How would you invent a resurrected idea when it's not part of Scripture? You know, it's like, sort of like prophecy. Once it unfolds, you can go back and go, oh, you will not leave my body to decay in hell. Oh, that must be a prophecy about Jesus. But prior to that, you wouldn't even know what you're going to think is about you. Isaiah 53, suffering servant. Psalm 22 is a messianic prophecies. Well, many rabbis will encourage Jews not to read the New Testament because when you do it, you read it Matthew. Matthew's a very Jewish book. You're sort of like, whoa, this makes sense, the suffering servant. But then you got Rabbi Rashi out of France. You know, no guilt by association, but, you know, he was French. What does he know? I'm kidding. But the point that I'm making is he says Psalm 53, he's talking about the Jews. He's not talking about no messianic figure, you know. And a lot of them follow Rashi. But they claimed that Jesus had risen from the dead. And when he was crucified, they all betrayed him. I mean, the first pope for Rome didn't do too good. Denied him 3 times, right? He's embarrassing himself, you know, at the Mount of Transfiguration. Hey, it's good for us to be here. Let's build a couple houses. Right? That's the first pope. And the first pope gets rebuked in Joppa by Paul for being a hypocrite. So, I guess it would have to be other popes in Rome that would be sort of more in line of perfection than Peter himself. But we'll get into some of this stuff later. So they died for resurrection belief when they left him at the cross. Right? You were with him. You're one of them. No, I wasn't. Remember standing there, warming their hands by the fire, and The girl sees him. He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Not only are they lying, but they're betraying Christ. And they were with him for 3 years. You have not been with him for 3 years like they were. Walking on water, giving life to the dead. I didn't say resurrections. I do not believe he was performing resurrections, because resurrection means you die once you're raised from the dead. You don't die again. Lazarus died again. Jairus' daughter died again. So he gave life to the dead. He gave them life. And you have that in some of the Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls that they found, right? I think it's 4Q 551 or something. But having said that, they died for their belief. There was an unheard of boldness following the resurrection that they claimed they had seen. And they went out and turned the world right side up. That's what they sought to do. And you would think, you know, I've been in one of the prison cells that held Peter and Paul, and it's smaller than this room. And it's got this like watery smell, you know, so, you know, concrete, old rock type of walls, and they're sitting here, and you're touching all the walls. You almost become Orthodox, touching icons, you know. Maybe Paul touched this. Would you not? So, and I was standing there just going, wow, Peter and Paul, they were like really old. Both of these liars doing time. Let's say to stage the resurrection. Both of these liars standing there, we're not going to crack. I know, we want to go back to Jerusalem, but we're here now, in prison, you know, second time, because Paul was doing time in Caesarea as well. And both of them are in cahoots. You're going to lose your head. I'm going to be crucified upside down. Let's just stick through it, because we'll be famous, you know, and get 70 virgins like the Muslims will.
70.
Well, you know, it's now 70 times 70, I guess. But the point is you don't die for a known lie. Yeah. Suicide bombers die for a lie, but they think it's the truth. That's the difference. But you don't die for a known lie. Not to mention, when we did systematic theology in this room, remember I made, I read a one-page article to you, and I was talking about who the other disciples were that went to England, right? Very, very early. Remember the 12? After the 12 disciples had been appointed, there were other disciples appointed. Remember where they went? You know, Thomas is horsing around in India. Well, some people made it to London, which was founded like, you know, 30 or 40 something AD. London, you know. So we'll do a little bit of world history too. Like if there's something interesting around, say, AD 70 that's happening in Sweden or something, I'm going to drop that one in too, because it's kind of cool to know what's happening on the other side of the world. All right, so in any event, keep that in mind when we get to the martyrs. Now, did Jesus intend to build a church? Yes or no? Did he intend to build a church? Albert Schweitzer says this. He was a missionary to Africa. He claimed that Jesus was obsessed with the end of the world and in turn died for this belief. That sounds like a lot of Christians today. Rudolf Bultmann, he was a German theologian, the liberal slant. He believed that Jesus was a prophet challenging to make a decision for or against God. Then you have the anti-institutionalists that argue that Jesus didn't intend for a church, but rather stressed a brotherhood of love and forgiveness, you know, moral and spiritual type of company. They sound like hippies. You have the Gospels. What do the Gospels say? Jesus told his disciples to carry on his work. Matthew 28, go into all nations. Go into all nations what? Then you can go 1, 2, 3. Making disciples, right? Baptizing them, teaching them what? All things that I have recommended. All things that I've commanded. So I'm of the view that if you're going to be a missionary, you better know something and not just go out there. Mom, I'm 12 years old or I'm 20 years old. I know nothing. I've just known the Lord for a month. I want to go to Africa and preach the gospel. Okay. Yeah, you can. Now, the disciples had been with Christ for 3 years, and that is seminary, on wheels, right? Miracles and everything else, you know. And he says, all things that I commanded. Remember, he taught them a lot more than what we have. what we have in the New Testament, specifically in the Gospels, the words in red, you think that's all he said? He said a lot more. Books of the world couldn't contain half of his verbiage, so to speak. So they knew a lot more than what we know about what he said. Is that fair? Go and teach them all things that I've commanded. So I think, I know a lot of Christians today are anti-intellectual. You go to seminary, you're going to come out of cemetery. I left churches because I heard that from the pulpit. Can't stand it. And yet, those pastors, whose books do they read? Ours. Read the seminary's books. The Great Commission, go into all nations, teaching and baptize them in my name. Here's some other notes. Listen here. What was Jesus' self-identity? The self-identity of Jesus, what was that? Remember the 7 I am statements? What book of the Bible do we find the I ams? John. I am what? The light of the world and the bread of life. Look at those I ams. If you don't have a clear self-identity, you're absolutely nuts if you claim those things. And remember C.S. Lewis, right? He was either Lord, lunatic, or liar. To that you could add legend. His radical claims to divinity, of being divine. And he did apologetics. He would say, you don't believe I'm God? Hey, Lazarus, come out of there. He'd make a radical claim and prove it. That's apologetics. He just did it better than the apologists do. But he gave evidence. So, his self-identity was clear. When you make statements like there's no one greater than John the Baptist, yet Jesus did greater things than John. You got to read between the lines there, right? Jesus called 12 disciples, yet he himself was not part of the 12. He was a leader of the 12. Similarly, if God called the 12 tribes of Israel, it would seem that Jesus did the same. 12 tribes of Israel, God called them. Then he calls 12 disciples, just like God. There you got a connection. And of course, we have in Jeremiah the new covenant, right? The new covenant. You can read up on that on your own. All right. Now listen, when I say first century Palestine, I'm one of the people who believe that in your Bibles, when you go to the very, very back, and it says Palestine before the time of Jesus, there was none. Okay? And let's be fair. When people call themselves Jordanians, and you have the Syrians over here, all of that was Israel.
Judea. There's Judea back.
Yeah. So, when you meet a person who's from Syria and one from Jordan, no, they're the same people. I'm Jordanian, therefore I'm different from you. No, it's all the same. So the Bible's, the word, by the way, does Palestine, does that even sound Arabic to you? It's it's a Latin term, Palestinius, It's like cookie to
Romans invented that word.
What's that?
It was the term Palestine was invented by the Romans.
Right.
But it was all of Judea all along before that. There was no Palestine.
Exactly. And it was a curse, You have this high-ranking Roman looking at the Jews going, you know what, you're not God's people. You're not Judeans. I'm going to call you Palestinians. So guess who the Palestinians really are? Slap in the face from Rome.
Right.
They were Jews.
Yep.
So don't give me this Palestinian state. If anything, rename Israel Palestine, and now it's still Jewish. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Yes. No? All right. So, when I say first century Palestine, this is now post-ascension. Are you with me? This is after Christ has resurrected and went back to where he came from. And that's another thing to claim to be divine. When he says, I must go back to the Father, right? Well, that means he came from the Father. You can't go back unless you left, so to speak. So first century Palestine, you have 2 million people. Half of them were Jewish. The Romans and their leadership to the Jew represented a very hatred way of life and paganism. Jewish belief at this time was that the Messiah would come after a cosmic struggle where the wicked will be judged and the righteous rewarded. In turn, everlasting kingdom on earth, centered in Jerusalem, will be established. All right? That quote there, if you like the Dead Sea Scrolls, I have a lot of books on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I was just fascinated by that group. I mean, the Essenes that lived at Qumran. Many people probably say, wow, this is boring and it's too hot here. I would love to live there. You know what I mean? Just put a little house right there by Qumran. And it's miserable. You got the Dead Sea right across the street, so why not? But this group of Essenes, you have the Pharisees, right? You have the Essenes, you have the Sadducees, and then you have the Zealots. Zealots were like, Jewish Hell's Angels, just stab a Roman, right? They were just nuts. But they meant well. In fact, the Zealots would be like the Christians should ISIS really come into Texas and enter Orange County. That's when I'll stand on my balcony with all of my guns. Bring it. So, you'll have all these militias, right? Well, that's what those were the Zealots. It's sort of like, don't come in here and push Sharia law on us out of Rome. You know what I mean? We want your paganism. Pray to Jupiter and all this, and have prostitution temples like you have in Corinth. We don't want that here in Jerusalem. And then, after Constantine, he sort of Christianized, right? Half the known world back then. Now the Jews are gone. Now Jerusalem is really not Jewish. It's pagan Christian. Yes?
So were they called the Essenes before 70 AD, or was that only after they went to Qumran, then they were Essenes as that group that was there?
In the history of the Jewish war and other writings of Josephus, he calls them Essenes very, very early. Very early. I don't remember what year he wrote that, but I believe it was before AD 70. I'll find that out. Someone pull it up online. But the Pharisees, let me just go back a little bit. This little...
Pliny the Elder, 79 CE, first reference to this.
First? Really?
First reference is by the Roman writer Pliny the Elder, died 79.
Okay, so he died in 79. Let's hope he wrote it in 68. Because that's when Qumran was taken out. And then the Romans went into Qumran, are the caves by the Dead Sea, where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then they went in and burned down Jerusalem, and then they went to Masada and killed the last Jews on top of there. We did a trip last year to Masada. Steve's sitting on the couch, and I should have seen him when he walked down. I was going to call an ambulance, but it would take an hour for the ambulance to get there, so to speak. That was a good hike, though, wasn't it? Hey, bro, how are you? Hello, have a seat. We had some technical difficulties, so just stay put. We'll probably go a little longer. Who's here for philosophy? I think just 2 students signed up for philosophy. You, and you, right? All right, that's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a little longer on church history, a little longer on Christian ethics, all right? Philosophy, we won't go so long on that. This is more important. But in any event, the sect known as the Essenes, some believe that John the Baptizer, I don't call him John the Baptist, because that gives the Baptist too much credibility, John the Baptizer. Some of them believe, you'll find this in history books, what I just said, I kid you not. You think I'm just joking, this is serious. John the Baptizer. They called him an Essene. Like maybe he was hanging out with these Essenes at Qumran. I don't believe so. But he's like, dressed in camel hair and all this other stuff. But when you get to Qumran, you'll see all these mikvahs, which is ritual bathing, right? You walk down, set of steps, and if I'm walking down and Corey's walking up, if he rubs against my arm, we got to do it all over again, because now I'm unclean walking out of there. I mean, these guys were serious about their bathing rituals, and they copied, of course, every book of the Bible. We have copies, fragments, and entire books from Qumran before 70 A.D., every book of the Bible except for Esther. Go figure, they were probably just guys, sitting there. So, yeah, a full scroll of Isaiah called the Isaiah scroll. But that's very important when you're studying the reliability of the Old Testament. Not talking about the New Testament. Because the year span between the oldest and the newest, right? If you got 5,000 years in between, that's kind of like a lot of things could change, right? So Dead Sea Scrolls serves that purpose, and they were serious. They didn't like the way that the temple in Jerusalem was being, ran, if you will. How, you got a bunch of Sadducees who don't even believe in miracles and resurrections, and, they're sort of like, it would be like the Jesus Seminar, running Rome. Jesus Seminar, they sit around and vote with colored beads, deciding what Jesus said and what he didn't say. And they're self-proclaimed scholars. They're not scholars, they're self-proclaimed. If I teach history at Cal State Fullerton, that does not make me a scholar. You know what I mean? Makes you a scholar is you study Greek or Hebrew and run with theology and everything else. Focus on that if you're going to be a New Testament scholar. But having said that, in this paragraph here, Jewish belief at the time was the Messiah will come after cosmic struggle, where the wicked will be judged. You'll read about that in the War Scroll. Write that down. Google. Go to the Dead Sea Scrolls site, and you can read these things translated. The War Scroll is very, very interesting. I mean, you want to talk about the Book of Revelation written at Qumran? It's that intense. Just go Dead Sea Scrolls Museum online.
Okay, the one we went to, I didn't know.
No, that's the real museum, but you can pull them up online now. They're becoming more publicly available. You can actually pull up the War Scroll. Not on Google Images. Find the website.
Okay.
And if you can't find it, ask me, because I have it written down somewhere. I mean, all the available scrolls, you can just click them up and look at them yourself. But the War Scroll is interesting, especially in light of Revelation, especially in light of see, the Pharisees didn't leave us any writings. Sadducees, they didn't bother. All we got is the Essenes, But they did not like the people in charge of Jerusalem, so they just left. Sort of like Jesus went into the desert, right? He was tempted. John the Baptist was out there, voice crying in the wilderness. Paul, right? My gosh, I just met the Lord on the road to Damascus. What did he do? Went into the Arabian desert for 3 years to seek the Lord. That's why they left. You go, why would you leave Jerusalem to live in this whatever? It was surrounded by stones and it's hot. Why? Because they just sat there and they were waiting for the Lord. And some of these scrolls that they have, it says that there were angels walking among them. I don't know if they were angels or demons. I'm not sure. I wasn't there. But they were seriously into the Jewish law. So the Pharisees, those were the separated ones. That's what we call them, the separated ones. They stressed pietism and patriotism, had little respect for the ritually unclean, beggars, kick them to the side. You got Jesus stepping up and go, hey, look at the Good Samaritan. Jordan River is very small. And if you were walking, say, from Jerusalem into Samaria, and Samaria sort of crosses here to Jordan, you would literally cross the river, sort of like walk on this side, just to bypass Samaria. Because they're unclean Samaritans. And so when we read the story about the Good Samaritan, that was not a popular thing to share if there's 5 Pharisees sitting over there having falafels and some teas going, what did this guy just say? Right? Seriously. So that's some strong condemnations right there. Also, remember this, it was in Samaria, that despicable city for the Pharisees, where Jesus revealed his messiahship. To whom? A woman. At noon. What's she doing there at noon? You draw water early in the morning. Divine appointment. It's sort of in your face, And a virgin, Mary gave birth, to the Messiah. When you see paintings at Sunday school and you see Mary riding on the donkey and Joseph is walking the donkey, well, most people in those days, Joseph would be sitting on the donkey and Mary would be walking him. All right? Women's rights comes from the gospel. Wherever the gospel goes, women have rights. Where it doesn't go, well, you cover your heads, or whatever. Like we see so many other countries. So they were the separated ones, extremely observed. They observed every detail of the law, wrote their own little laws. The Sadducees, they controlled the Jewish Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, what's that? That's the equivalent of the U.S. Supreme Court. Sanhedrin is like the U.S. Supreme Court. They had no real influence, though, on the common Jew, common people. There were guys sitting in robes up there just debating whatever. Interesting, when you have the Sadducees debating Jesus, the Pharisees come in through the back door, and Sadducees are sitting there talking to the Lord. And remember, they're being sarcastic. It's like this woman, said 59,000 husbands, and who's going to be hers if there's an afterlife? Hello, right? Like they thought they had him. And he could not go to the psalmists. He could not go to Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Daniel, or Ezekiel, because they didn't believe in any of that stuff. They only believed in the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. Now, you find one verse in the 5 books of Moses that proves the resurrection. Find me one. And it's interesting when Jesus says, hey, God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, meaning they still live. He pulled that one out like that, his ace in the hole. Pharisees come in, well spoken, because they believe in resurrection as well. And then he just leaves and they continue to debate. But it's interesting when you read the Bible that way. Why did he go to that verse? There was a reason. That was the only authority for the Sadducee. And I'm not going to say that's why they were Sadducee, because you hear that all the time. You have the Zealots, hell-bent on armed resistance against the Roman, desired to go back to the glorious days of 200 BC, at the time of the what? The Maccabees. Remember the Catholic Bible, they have 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which is interesting history. And then you have the Essenes, still no interest in neither politics, and many scholars say, nor fighting. But when you get to the War Scroll, they really believe that they would be the army of God to take out the sons of darkness. They looked at themselves as the sons of light, interesting verbiage, and the sons of darkness which is pretty much Romans in the known world, will be judged when the Messiah comes back. And just so you've heard it, the teacher of righteousness that lived in Qumran, some say they believe he was the Messiah, that it just does not work. I wrote a paper on it, and there's just too many scholarly problems with it. So the teacher of righteousness is not the Messiah. He died before some of the scrolls were even penned down that talks about it. So that's one problem, right? What else? All right, let's move on. We got a few more minutes left. Jesus called for his own loyalty to him and his message. The way, again, I mentioned the way, and the way, the truth, and the life. What Christians were called at first, followers of Jesus who claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life. And notice here, by the way, that is one of those verses. I just have to touch on a little bit of apologetics and philosophy of religion here. When he says, I am the way, he didn't say I'm one of many ways. And, you know, in today's Western culture, sometimes we're uncomfortable in saying that because it sounds so exclusive and so narrow-minded. Well, narrow's the gate. Well, you just made it worse. But here's what you have to remember. Truth, by definition, excludes all others. Truth, by definition, excludes all others. If it's true that I am Nick, I can't be non-Nick and Betsy at the same time. If something is true, whatever contradicts that truth cannot also be true. Therefore, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity cannot be true at the same time and in the same way. God can't be the tree and not the tree, pantheism. He can't be one and many, Mormonism or Hinduism. And he can't be one and not one at the same time. If you believe in religious pluralism, you might as well just say, you know what, atheism is true and so is monotheism. God can exist and not exist at the same time in the same way. Really? That was a 30-second response to lining up all the world faiths, pretty much, cults included. You have pantheism, right? You have polytheism. Pan means all. All is God, God is all. You're God, I'm the, Shirley MacLaine is God, right? God forbid. And then you have polytheism, which is many. And then you have mono, which is one. If religious pluralism is true, all roads lead to Rome, doesn't matter what you believe. Sort of like, if you want to have an abortion, that's up to you. I personally wouldn't. If you want to, You want to be homosexual. I personally wouldn't. It's not a preference claim. Those are preference claims, like I like vanilla over chocolate ice cream. These are truth claims. They're not preference claims. So you can't have God being all and not all, many and not many, and one and not one at the same time and in the same way. Contradictions are not true. So when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but by me, if that's true, whatever contradicts that truth is false. It's pretty simple. And he proved it by raising himself from the dead. Interesting. Father raised him from the dead. I'm going to raise myself from the dead in 3 days, right? I will live. Well, you get the Trinity at work. He just didn't do it by himself. All right, Jesus' main theme, the kingdom of God. His first words, the time is fulfilled in Mark 1:15, and the kingdom of God is at hand. Imagine if I walked in here next week, I was just, hey guys, I'm here. Kingdom of God is at hand. I just arrived. You leave, right? But he proved, he did a lot more things. So then he says, repent and believe in the gospel. Well, this is Mark 1:5, Mark 1:15. There's no gospel written yet. What's he talking about? It's about to be unfolded. All right. I'm going to run through a few quick points here, and this is going to frustrate you because you're not going to be able to write this fast. I just want you to hear it, all right? You'll have it in the PowerPoint. A snapshot overview. We're going 33 to 100 AD, 5 minutes. You'll have this unpopularly. And it's okay if I speak fast, because if you speak slow, you get less. So if I speak fast, you get more, and then you can look at the PowerPoints and you're all good. Jesus claims to be God and is crucified and then resurrected. He makes numerous appearances to his early followers, including pagans. You have that in 1 Corinthians 15. Paul wrote that letter approximately 55 or 56 AD. That's very short. It's a short time span. If Jesus rose from the dead 33 AD, you got the first letter to the Corinthian church already 20 years later. Some of the witnesses are still alive. Remember, he says, you don't believe me? Go talk to these guys over there. They saw him too. At Pentecost, the disciples are preaching the good news in Jerusalem. The Holy Spirit descends upon them, and thousands are added to the church. You see that in the book of Acts, written by Luke. Stephen is the first Christian martyr, 32 AD, 33 AD. I know it sounds funny. How could he die before Jesus was resurrected? Well, it depends on when you say Jesus was born. I believe Jesus was born in 4 BC because our calendars had some problems with them. But you can look that up on your own. In 37 AD, 37 now, Paul is converted. Gaius Galliga becomes a Roman emperor. That's sort of like what's going on now in the Roman Empire. In 41 AD, Cornelius, remember Cornelius? The Roman centurion, he's converted. Now, I mentioned that funny name, Caligula of Rome. He's assassinated and then succeeded by Claudius. If you go to the Vatican, you'll see a head of Claudius. And it looks just like my son-in-law. And he is Italian. I go, look at you guys. Seriously. Same nose, same face, hairline back here. You know, totally Roman. So Claudius. In 43 AD, London is founded. And Romans, of course, invade Britain. What's Britain? That's England. Same thing. Around 44 AD, Christians face a strong persecution by King Herod Agrippa. A different King Herods. This is Agrippa. In turn, James is beheaded and Peter thrown in prison. The first followers of Jesus are called Christians in Antioch. I mentioned that an hour ago. In AD 49, the Council of Jerusalem takes place. It is agreed that the Gentiles do not need to observe any Old Testament Jewish law. In turn, Paul readies to preach the gospel to the Gentile world. Peter and James, they stay in Jerusalem. All right? During that time, you have the Han Dynasty, founded in China. That same year, Buddhism is introduced to the Chinese. Isn't that interesting? So that's what's going on in the other part, in the Far East versus the Middle East. Or the Middle East being the Near East, because it's nearer to us than the Far East.
What did you say that was?
That was in 49. 49 AD. And remember now, a little thing on Buddhism. Buddhism was founded in rejection of Hinduism. Hinduism is older. It's polytheistic, many gods. A group of Hindus, monks, broke away from Hinduism. And they founded Buddhism. And the Buddha's name is Siddhartha Gautama. That's a good one to know when you're talking to a Buddhist. So you get a little respect. You know his name, Siddhartha? Yeah, I do. It's a long name. But the original Buddhist monks were atheistic in thought. Now remember, truth doesn't change. 2 plus 2 is 4 forever. 2 plus 2 is 4 whether you know it or not. Stockholm is the capital of Sweden, whether someone on the beaches of Zimbabwe know it or not. If there is a beach in Zimbabwe. Do you get the point? Truth is truth regardless of the knower. Regardless of geography, what your educational background is. 2 plus 2 is 4, period. It should be 22, but it isn't. Take 2s, line them up, should be 22. I used to think that as a kid. But that's confusing. It should be 22. But having said that, in the same year, many Jews are expelled from Rome. Between 49 and 96 A.D., the dating of John's Gospel, all the New Testament books are completed. It was completed before the end of the 1st century. We have a pagan Bible. Does that sound good or not? No. We had a Gnostic. Anybody remember his name? Steve? Marcion. The Marcion Bible. Marcion was a heretic. He had his own little Bible way before John wrote the book of Revelation in 96 A.D. So if he had his own little book with various letters put together, that tells me that those Gospels and various Pauline epistles or whatnot circulated well in that region, way before the end of the 1st century. So when someone was to say, well, guys got together, decided this and that, 500 A.D., 400 A.D., or whatever, we already had the books completed in the 1st century. All right? In A.D. 50, one of the earliest Christian churches are erected in Corinth, 50 A.D. Shortly thereafter, Paul writes a letter, of course. In 54 A.D., Claudius, remember I told you about Claudius in Rome? He's poisoned by his own wife and succeeded by Nero. You've all heard of Nero, I hope. Nero the madman. So Claudius up to Nero. That's how he got to power. Paul writes his 2 letters to Corinth right around 56 A.D., some say 55. And by the way, when you're reading in scholarly journals, not that maybe you won't read a scholarly journal, but if you're reading in your Bibles, and it says right here, the liberal theologians go with an early date of John, and the conservative scholars go with a later date of John. Okay, if I were to tell you, hypothetically, John wrote the book of Revelation, let's just say 68 A.D., before the destruction of Jerusalem, right? And then somebody else says, no, he finished it in 96 or 97 A.D., because he died in AD 100, approximately, of natural causes. That's cool, we're going to get that on camera. So the point I'm making, though, is the early date or a late date. The late date is still an early date. If you say, I believe Paul wrote, the letter to, the first letter to Corinth, and you say, I think he wrote it in 70 A.D., and I say, no, it's 56 A.D., well, 70 A.D. is still an early date. Do you understand that? It's still within the 1st century. Later date or new date, it's no big deal. Give them the late date or the early date, whatever makes you feel good. But both of them can't be true. It's either early or not. But even the late is early. All right, 50 A.D., one of the earliest churches. I mentioned that in Corinth. In 54 A.D., Claudius is poisoned. Paul writes his letters. Mark is written in 58 A.D. That's the first gospel. Mark, it's the shortest one. Matthew and Luke, somewhere between 60 and 62 A.D. Peter and Paul are taken to Europe. They're executed on Nero between 64 and 68 A.D. Paul and Peter. Maybe one day we can all go to Rome. I'll take you to that prison cell. In 64 A.D., huge fire erupts in Rome, right? And Christians are blamed for the fire. In turn, Nero persecutes and kills thousands of believers in Rome and throughout Rome. In 68 A.D., Nero commits suicide. Well, I guess so, right? This guy was so nuts that in his backyard, he would take Christians and tie them to a tree, light them on fire, get naked, drink as much alcohol as he could, get on his horse, and do slalom between burning bodies. I mean, that guy was demon-possessed, if anyone. That's why we call him Nero the Madman. He was absolutely nuts.
He could kill
But a lot of the Romans were. I mean, one of the emperors, appointed his horse as a senator. Really? What were you going to say?
Oh, did he kill himself?
Yeah, he committed suicide.
What year?
That was in, 68 A.D. So when Nero is committing suicide, all sorts of stuff is going on in Jerusalem, right? Qumran is about to be lit ablaze when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. 70 A.D., they're going to burn down Jerusalem. And during this time, Christians are already being killed in Rome. And Paul and Peter are there. All of the Temple Mount, never mind, get back a little bit. 70 A.D. is where we arrive at the Jewish revolt, right? That's what led to burning down Jerusalem. That's when they melted the temple, they lit it on fire. Remember, just think of bricks, and instead of having mortar or cement, it was gold. So when you're traveling far away in the desert, you're like in the Sinai Peninsula or something, and you see that temple, and the sunlight is hitting that thing at sunrise or sunset, it would just glare at you. Yes, I can't wait for the Jewish festivals. Everyone's excited. Well, they melted that. The Romans took all that gold, stole the temple treasure, and so forth. And the only thing that they left, was the Western Wall. The Western Wall where the Jews pray. I like to call it the Western Wall. What's another word for it?
Wailing Wall.
Wailing Wall. Hey, Jews don't like that. Praise the Lord, too. We don't just stand here and cry. What do you mean Wailing Wall? Like I'm wailing all the time? Just moaning. So, Titus orders Jerusalem to be destroyed. Remember, Titus is in charge now. Nero already committed suicide. This results in both Jews and Christians fleeing to other parts of the Roman Empire. Still not popular, but at least they're not killed. In the same year, 70 A.D., Antioch becomes the center for Christianity. Notice, it's not Rome yet. Antioch is the birthplace of Orthodox Christianity and the oldest. In between 70 and 81 A.D., the Colosseum in Rome is built. Once completed, Christians again were thrown to beasts in front of pagan spectators. In 75 A.D., Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian, he writes the infamous History of the Jewish War. There it is, 75 A.D. So it wasn't 69, just 5 years after Jerusalem was burned down. You mentioned something about that, right, Greg? Am I talking to the right person? Or somebody else? All right. In 81, Domitian, who's absolutely nuts as well, he becomes emperor, and Roman persecution of Christians intensifies. Jews are thrown. So you got Domitian, right, killing Christians, and Jews are throwing Christians out of the Jewish synagogues within the Roman Empire. So at this point right now, it's sort of like a death wish, wanting to be a Christian. In AD 85, early date, or 96, late date, John writes his gospel. Why do you think it's so different? You've heard the term synoptics, right? The synoptic gospels is Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're sort of like more historical, right? John is like over here in the left field by himself. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and the Word took on flesh, and it's like, why is he writing so different? Why is it even called a gospel? So the first three, Matthew, Mark, Luke, are called the synoptic gospels, or the synoptics. John, sort of like on his own. Well, he doesn't need to duplicate what Mark did. He doesn't need to duplicate what Matthew did or Luke. They did their thing. No, you know what? Gnosticism is rampant, right? I'm going to set the record straight on Christology, the study of Jesus, Christology, which is why it stresses his divine nature and human nature like none of the others do. Between 85 and 150 A.D., we arrive at the writings of the earliest church fathers, Barnabas, Clement of Rome, Ignatius, and Polycarp. Barnabas, Clement of Rome, Ignatius, and Polycarp. And we're going to get into some of the things that they taught, what they had to say throughout the course. In AD 100, John dies of natural causes. All of the others were martyred. All the other followed the 12 disciples, excluding John, and the one that was appointed. Judas went to kill himself. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Another one was appointed. They all died vicious deaths. And there is in the Populi, for those of you that haven't seen it, there's a YouTube link, part of the Resurrection movie that we just completed. We're still going to work out some bugs. But I don't know how long it is, but I'm sitting in the Kidron Valley, and you can see the eastern wall behind me and the Temple Mount, and it's I'm going very, very fast, and it's sarcastic. You know, what would be a good idea for Thomas to go and get spared alive? You know what I mean? What would be a good idea for this or that? Why? Would they die for a lie? Why this? Why that? Boom, boom, boom. It's very fast, and I go through how they all died. Some of it's tradition. Some of it's history. I wasn't in India, so I don't know, you know? But, yes?
About your timeline, did you say Jesus was born, you believe, in 4 AD?
4 BC.
4 BC?
Yeah.
And then what year did he die?
33 AD.
33 AD.
Yeah. Okay, well, that completes that. We're going to move right into Christian ethics. I don't stop, so if you need to use the restroom, go a little fast and come back. I'm just going to continue to go.
I know you're gonna break it, babe.
Oh, that's right. We better break the camera. Not break it, you know. Take a break.